There is a machine in your home that you barely think about until it stops working. When it does stop, in July in Texas, you think about nothing else. You call repair services with the frantic urgency of someone requesting medical attention. You sleep in your car with the engine running. You consider, briefly, whether your marriage can survive a second night at 86 degrees with 90% humidity. The air conditioner is, for roughly 2 billion people on Earth, the single most important appliance they own. More important than the refrigerator, more important than the washing machine, more important than the phone. And yet almost nobody knows why it exists. Not why it is useful. That part is obvious. Why it was invented. Because it was not invented for comfort. It was not invented to cool buildings or help people sleep or make summer bearable. It was invented for ink. Specifically, it was invented because a printing company in Brooklyn could not get its colors to line up. This is the secret history of the air conditioner. And it is, without exaggeration, a story about how one engineer's solution to a paper problem rearranged the population of the United States, changed the global balance of political power, and accidentally punched a hole in the ozone layer. If you enjoy these deep dives into the hidden engineering behind everyday objects, hit subscribe. We release a new episode every week, and you will never look at your thermostat the same way again. The year is 1902. The place is the Sackett-Wilhelms Lithographing and Publishing Company in Brooklyn, New York. They print magazines, and they have a problem. Color printing in 1902 is a multi-pass process. To print a full-color image, you run the same sheet of paper through the press multiple times, once for each color. Cyan, magenta, yellow, black. Each pass lays down one color in precise alignment with the others. If the alignment is off by even a fraction of a millimeter, the image looks blurry, the colors bleed, and the print run is ruined. The problem is humidity. In the summer months in Brooklyn, humidity fluctuates wildly. Paper is hygroscopic, which means it absorbs and releases moisture from the air. When humidity rises, paper absorbs water and expands. When humidity drops, the paper contracts. A sheet that was one size during the cyan pass might be slightly larger during the magenta pass and slightly smaller during the yellow pass. The colors do not line up. Print after print comes out smeared, misregistered, unusable. Sackett-Wilhelms is losing money and deadlines. They contact the Buffalo Forge Company, a heating and ventilation firm in Buffalo, New York. Buffalo Forge assigns the problem to a recent engineering graduate from Cornell University named Willis Carrier. He is 25 years old. He has been out of school for less than a year. His salary is $10 a week. And he is about to change the world, though he does not know it yet, and neither does anyone else. Carrier's insight was deceptively simple. The printing company did not need cooler air. It needed drier air. The problem was humidity, not temperature. But Carrier understood something that most people even today do not fully grasp. Temperature and humidity are inextricably linked. You cannot control one without affecting the other. Warm air holds more moisture than cold air. If you cool air below a certain temperature, called the dew point, water vapor condenses out of it. This is why your cold glass of water forms droplets on the outside on a humid day. The glass is not leaking. The air around the glass has been cooled below its dew point, and the water vapor in that air is condensing on the cold surface. Carrier realized he could control humidity by controlling temperature. If he drew warm, humid factory air over a set of cold coils, the air would cool below its dew point. Water would condense out onto the coils, and the air leaving the coils would be both cooler and drier. He could then reheat the air to whatever temperature the factory needed while maintaining the precise humidity level required for consistent paper dimensions. He was not trying to make people comfortable. He was trying to make paper hold still. On July 17, 1902, Carrier's system went into operation at Sackett-Wilhelms. It worked. The paper held its dimensions. The colors registered. The prints came out clean. The employees, as an unintended side effect, stopped sweating through their shirts. Nobody at Buffalo Forge or Sackett-Wilhelms realized they had just witnessed the birth of an industry that would eventually consume more electricity than any other single end use in many countries on Earth. Now, I need to stop here and explain something that sounds technical, but is actually one of the most elegant pieces of physics in your daily life. How does an air conditioner actually move heat? Because it does something that seems to violate common sense. It takes heat from inside your house, where the temperature is, say, 75 degrees, and dumps it outside, where the temperature might be 95 degrees. It moves heat from a cooler place to a hotter place. That is like water flowing uphill. It should not work, and it would not work, except for a thermodynamic trick involving phase changes. Here is the trick. When a liquid evaporates and becomes a gas, it absorbs an enormous amount of heat from its surroundings. This is called the latent heat of vaporization. You experience this every time you step out of a swimming pool and feel cold. The water on your skin is evaporating, and as it transitions from liquid to gas, it absorbs heat from your body. Your skin gets cold. The water molecules carry that thermal energy away with them as they become vapor. An air conditioner exploits this principle using a closed loop of refrigerant. The refrigerant is a chemical specifically chosen because it boils, that is, transitions from liquid to gas, at a very low temperature under the right pressure conditions. The cycle has 4 stages. First, liquid refrigerant at low pressure enters the evaporator coil, which is inside your house. Because the pressure is low, the refrigerant's boiling point is well below room temperature. It boils, absorbing heat from the indoor air passing over the coil. The air gets cooler. The refrigerant becomes a gas. Second, this gas is sucked into the compressor, which is the loud humming unit outside your house. The compressor squeezes the gas, raising its pressure and temperature dramatically. The refrigerant is now a superheated, high-pressure gas, much hotter than the outdoor air. Third, this hot gas flows through the condenser coil, which is also outside. Because the refrigerant is now hotter than the outdoor air, heat flows naturally from the refrigerant into the outside air. The refrigerant cools and condenses back into a liquid. Fourth, the high-pressure liquid passes through an expansion valve, which drops the pressure suddenly. The refrigerant cools dramatically and returns to the evaporator to start the cycle again. That is it. That is the entire system. Evaporate, compress, condense, expand. 4 steps, endlessly repeated. You are not creating cold. There is no such thing as cold in physics. There is only heat, and the absence of heat. Your air conditioner is a heat pump. It is picking up heat from inside your house and carrying it outside, molecule by molecule, cycle by cycle. The cold air blowing from your vents is simply air that has had its heat removed, and the hot air blowing from the unit outside your house is the same heat, relocated. Your air conditioner does not destroy heat, it moves it. The universe's total amount of heat is unchanged. You have just rearranged its geography. Now, back to Willis Carrier. After the success at Sackett-Wilhelms, Carrier began refining his invention. In 1906, he was granted U.S. Patent number 808897, titled Apparatus for Treating Air. This patent is widely considered the foundational document of the modern air conditioning industry. But Carrier did something even more important than build a machine. In 1911, he presented a paper to the American Society of Mechanical Engineers titled Rational Psychrometric Formulae. This paper laid out the mathematical relationships between temperature, humidity, dew point, and enthalpy in a systematic way that engineers could use to design air conditioning systems for any climate, any building, any purpose. It was the theoretical framework that turned air conditioning from a one-off invention into a repeatable engineering discipline. Before this paper, designing an air conditioning system was artisanal guesswork. After it, it was science. Carrier was fired from Buffalo Forge in 1915. Not because he failed, but because Buffalo Forge wanted to focus on its core business of industrial fans and forges, and Carrier's air conditioning projects were expensive, speculative, and consumed too much management attention. Carrier and 6 other engineers pooled their savings, $12,000 each, and founded the Carrier Engineering Corporation. $12,000 in 1915 is roughly $350,000 in today's money. Each of these men bet their life savings on the idea that controlling indoor air was going to be a big business. They were spectacularly right, but it took decades. The early years of air conditioning were entirely industrial. Carrier's systems went into textile mills, pharmaceutical plants, tobacco factories, munitions plants, and food processing facilities. Anywhere that humidity, temperature, or air quality affected the product, Carrier found a customer. The textile industry was a particularly important early client. Cotton and wool fibers behave differently at different humidity levels. Too dry, and the fibers become brittle and snap during weaving. Too humid, and they become limp and tangle. Controlling humidity in a textile mill was not a comfort issue. It was a product quality issue, just like the printing problem that started it all. The pattern is interesting. Air conditioning entered industry after industry through the same door, not as a comfort amenity, but as a manufacturing necessity. Comfort was always the side effect. Quality control was the purpose. The Carrier Engineering Corporation grew steadily through the 1920s, installing systems in ever more ambitious buildings. They air-conditioned the United States Senate in 1929 and the House of Representatives in 1928. They installed systems in department stores, office buildings, and hotels. Each installation was a custom engineering project. There were no standard units. Every system was designed from scratch for its specific building, climate, and purpose. Carrier's engineers had to calculate heat loads, humidity requirements, airflow patterns, and duct dimensions for each individual project. It was engineering-intensive, expensive, and slow. But the general public had no exposure to air conditioning at all. Most people in 1920 had never experienced conditioned air. They did not know it existed. They did not know they wanted it. The thing that changed this was the movies. In the early 1920s, movie theaters were miserable in summer. They were dark, crowded, poorly ventilated buildings packed with hundreds of warm bodies. Summer was the slow season for theaters because nobody wanted to sit in a sweltering room for 2 hours. Theater owners tried everything. They hung blocks of ice in the back and blew fans over them. They installed crude ventilation systems that pushed hot air around without cooling it. They offered free lemonade. Nothing worked. In 1925, Carrier installed a centrifugal chiller system in the Rivoli Theater on Broadway in New York City. This was not a minor installation. The centrifugal chiller was itself a major Carrier innovation. Previous cooling systems used reciprocating compressors, which were large, noisy, and prone to vibration. Carrier's centrifugal design was smaller, quieter, and more efficient. It used a spinning impeller to compress the refrigerant, much like a turbine. It was the engineering breakthrough that made large-scale comfort cooling practical. The effect at the Rivoli was immediate and dramatic. For the first time, a public space was cool, dry, and comfortable in the middle of a New York summer. The theater advertised refrigerated air on its marquee, and people lined up around the block. Not to see the movie, to feel the air. The Rivoli's manager reported that audiences gasped when they walked through the doors. Some people sat through multiple showings of the same film, not because they loved the picture, but because they did not want to go back outside. Theater owners across the country took notice. Within a few years, air-conditioned movie theaters were everywhere. The movie industry's relationship with summer transformed completely. Before air conditioning, summer was the dead season for movies. After air conditioning, summer became the peak season. People went to the movies specifically to escape the heat. This is the origin of the summer blockbuster. The term blockbuster literally refers to a movie so popular that the line of people waiting to see it stretched around the block. And the reason those lines existed in summer was not superior filmmaking. It was superior air conditioning. Hollywood's entire summer business model is, at its root, a side effect of Willis Carrier's humidity control system for a Brooklyn print shop. But movie theaters only introduced people to the experience of air conditioning. They did not put it in homes, and home air conditioning was, for the first 3 decades of the technology's existence, essentially impossible for a grimly practical reason. The refrigerants were terrifying. The earliest mechanical cooling systems used ammonia as a refrigerant. Ammonia works beautifully as a refrigerant. It has excellent thermodynamic properties. It is cheap, and it is widely available. It is also toxic, corrosive, and flammable. An ammonia leak in a factory is a serious industrial incident. An ammonia leak in someone's bedroom is a potential fatality. Other early refrigerants were no better. Methyl chloride, used in many refrigeration systems in the 1920s, is also toxic. In 1929, a methyl chloride leak in a Cleveland hospital killed more than 100 people. Sulfur dioxide, another common refrigerant, is the gas produced by volcanoes. It reacts with moisture in the lungs to form sulfuric acid. None of these chemicals belonged anywhere near a residential building, and everyone knew it. Air conditioning was stuck in the industrial sector, not because the engineering could not be scaled down, but because the working fluid would kill you if the system leaked. Enter Thomas Midgley, Jr. Midgley is one of the most consequential and controversial figures in 20th century industrial chemistry, and you have almost certainly never heard of him. Environmental historian J.R. McNeill has called him the single most environmentally destructive organism in the history of the planet. That is a strong claim, and it is not entirely unfair. In 1921, working at General Motors, Midgley discovered that adding tetraethyl lead to gasoline eliminated engine knock. This discovery led to leaded gasoline, which was used worldwide for over 50 years, and is now recognized as one of the most significant sources of environmental lead contamination in human history. Lead from gasoline exhaust settled into soil, water, and the bloodstreams of billions of people. The phase-out of leaded gasoline, which did not begin until the 1970s, is estimated to have raised the average IQ of children born after the ban by several points. Midgley himself suffered lead poisoning during his research and had to take a prolonged leave of absence. He knew the stuff was dangerous. He promoted it anyway. His first major invention poisoned the planet for half a century. His second major invention was about to do something even worse. There is a grim postscript to Midgley's life that feels almost like a parable. In 1940, he contracted polio, which left him severely disabled. He designed an elaborate system of pulleys and ropes to help himself get in and out of bed. In 1944, at the age of 55, he became entangled in the ropes and strangled to death. The man whose inventions had killed and sickened millions was killed by his own invention. You could not write it as fiction. Nobody would believe it. In 1928, Midgley was working at the Frigidaire division of General Motors, which was trying to develop a safe refrigerant for home refrigerators and air conditioners. Midgley and his team systematically worked through the periodic table, looking for compounds that were non-toxic, non-flammable, chemically stable, and had the right boiling point for refrigeration cycles. They settled on a family of chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. The first one they developed was dichlorodifluoromethane, which DuPont branded as Freon 12. Freon was a miracle. It was non-toxic. You could breathe it without immediate harm. It was non-flammable. You could hold a lit match to it, and nothing happened. It was chemically inert. It did not corrode pipes, seals, or compressor components. It was odorless. It had a boiling point of minus 29.8 degrees Celsius, which was nearly perfect for refrigeration applications. Midgley famously demonstrated Freon's safety at a meeting of the American Chemical Society by inhaling a lungful of the gas and then exhaling it to blow out a candle. The audience was stunned. Here was a refrigerant you could literally breathe. The safety problem that had kept air conditioning out of homes was solved. Freon transformed the industry overnight. Suddenly, air conditioning systems could be installed in homes, offices, hospitals, schools, and retail stores without the risk of poisoning the occupants. Carrier and other manufacturers raced to develop residential systems, but the machines were still large, expensive, and required professional installation. A central air conditioning system in the 1930s cost the equivalent of a new car. Only the wealthy could afford them. Air conditioning in the 1930s was a luxury item, like a swimming pool or a tennis court. It was something you saw in the homes of movie stars and industrial tycoons, not in the homes of school teachers and factory workers. The Second World War intervened, and air conditioning production for civilian use essentially stopped. Carrier and other manufacturers converted to war production. But the war itself accelerated the technology in unexpected ways. Millions of American servicemen were stationed in tropical and desert environments, from the Pacific Islands to North Africa. The military installed air conditioning in hospitals, command centers, and communications facilities in these theaters. Soldiers who had never experienced air conditioning before the war came home with a vivid understanding of what it felt like to be cool in the heat. They wanted it. They expected it. And the post-war economic boom gave them the means to buy it. In 1947, Carrier introduced the first mass-market window air conditioning unit. It sat in a window frame, required no ductwork, plugged into a standard electrical outlet, and cost about $350, roughly $4,300 in today's money. This was expensive, but attainable for a middle-class family. The window unit changed everything. You did not need to hire a contractor. You did not need to modify your house. You bought a box, put it in your window, and turned it on. Sales exploded. By 1953, over 1 million window units were sold per year in the United States. By 1960, the number was nearly 4 million per year. The window unit also changed how Americans socialized in ways that are easy to miss if you did not live through the transition. Before air conditioning, summer evenings were spent outside. People sat on front porches. They talked to their neighbors. Children played in the street until dark. Entire neighborhoods had a communal rhythm dictated by the heat. You could not stay inside because inside was hotter than outside once the sun went down and the trapped heat radiated from the walls. The front porch was not just an architectural feature. It was a social institution. It was where gossip was exchanged, courtships were conducted, local news was shared, and community bonds were maintained. Air conditioning moved people indoors. Once you could cool your living room to 72 degrees, There was no reason to sit on the porch in 85-degree humidity. People went inside, closed the windows, turned on the AC, and turned on the television. Another post-war technology that was reaching mass adoption at exactly the same time. The combination of air conditioning and television is one of the most powerful social restructuring forces of the 20th century. Together, they replaced outdoor communal life with indoor private life. The front porch declined. Neighborly interaction declined. The suburban living room, climate-controlled and screen-lit, became the center of American domestic life. Sociologists have debated the extent of this shift for decades, but the directional change is not in dispute. Americans spend far more time indoors today than they did before air conditioning, and the consequences for community cohesion, physical activity, and social connection are still being measured. And here is where the story gets truly strange, because air conditioning did not just make houses more comfortable. It rearranged where Americans lived. Before air conditioning, the Sun Belt states, roughly the southern third of the United States, from the Carolinas to Southern California, were economically underdeveloped and relatively sparsely populated compared to the industrial North and Midwest. The climate was brutal. Summers in Houston, Phoenix, Atlanta, and Miami were months-long endurance tests. Malaria was endemic in parts of the South well into the 20th century. The economy was agricultural. The infrastructure was poor. Young people left for the North, where the jobs were and the summers were survivable. Air conditioning reversed this migration pattern. It made the Sun Belt livable. Not just livable, comfortable. For the first time in history, you could live in Phoenix in July and not suffer. You could work in an office in Houston in August and wear a suit. You could retire to Florida and not spend 4 months feeling like you were slowly being poached. The Sun Belt population began to grow rapidly in the 1950s and never stopped. Between 1950 and 2000, the population of Phoenix grew from 107,000 to 1.3 million. Houston went from 600,000 to 1.9 million. Las Vegas went from 24,000 to 478,000. Atlanta, Charlotte, Dallas, San Antonio, Tampa, Orlando, all of them experienced explosive growth that would have been physically impossible without air conditioning. Demographers estimate that roughly half of the Sun Belt's population growth in the second half of the 20th century is directly attributable to air conditioning. This was not just a demographic shift, it was a political earthquake. The United States House of Representatives is apportioned by population. As people moved south and west, congressional seats followed them. The Sun Belt gained political power at the direct expense of the Northeast and Midwest. After the 2020 census, Texas gained 2 congressional seats, while New York lost 1. Florida gained 1, while Ohio lost 1. These shifts are cumulative. Over 6 decades, the Sun Belt has gained dozens of seats, while the Rust Belt and Northeast have lost them. But air conditioning reshaped Congress in a more direct way as well. Before air conditioning, Washington, D.C. was essentially uninhabitable in summer. The city was built on a swamp, and summer temperatures regularly exceeded 95 degrees with crushing humidity. Congress historically adjourned in the spring and did not reconvene until fall. The legislative session was short by physical necessity. There is a reason so much consequential legislation in American history was passed between January and May. After the Capitol and House and Senate office buildings were air-conditioned in the late 1920s and 30s, Congress could work year-round. The legislative session expanded. The federal government grew. More time in session meant more bills, more hearings, more regulation, more government activity. The expansion of the federal government in the 20th century has many causes, but one of them, genuinely, is that air conditioning allowed lawmakers to stay in Washington through July and August instead of fleeing the heat. I am not saying air conditioning caused any particular political outcome. I am saying it changed who lived where and how long legislators worked, and both of those things have enormous downstream consequences. Willis Carrier did not set out to reshape American politics. He set out to keep paper from expanding. But the cascade of consequences from that one engineering decision is still unfolding. Air conditioning also changed architecture. Before air conditioning, buildings were designed to manage heat passively. Southern homes had wide porches that shaded the walls from direct sunlight. Windows were tall and narrow, positioned to catch cross breezes. Ceilings were high because hot air rises and a high ceiling keeps the warmest air above head level. Homes in hot climates were oriented to face prevailing winds. They had thick walls that absorbed heat slowly during the day and radiated it away at night. These were not aesthetic choices. They were survival strategies, refined over centuries of building in hot climates. Air conditioning made all of that irrelevant. If you can mechanically cool the interior of a building to any temperature you want, you no longer need to design the building to stay cool passively. You can build glass skyscrapers in Houston. You can build sealed, windowless office buildings in Phoenix. You can build cheaply framed suburban houses with low ceilings and small windows in Atlanta, and just crank the AC. The entire vocabulary of climate-responsive architecture, developed over thousands of years, was abandoned in roughly 2 decades. What replaced it was cheaper to build and more expensive to operate. Modern buildings in the Sun Belt consume enormous amounts of electricity for cooling, partly because they are not designed to stay cool on their own. They are designed to be cooled by machines. The building itself is just an insulated box. All of the climate intelligence has been outsourced to the HVAC system. There is a dark poetry to this. Humans spent thousands of years learning how to build structures that worked with their climate. Then, in the span of a single generation, they abandoned that knowledge and replaced it with a compressor and a thermostat. It is as if we collectively decided that understanding our environment was too much trouble, and we would rather just overpower it. And this was not just an American phenomenon. Consider Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father of modern Singapore, was once asked what was the most important invention in history. He did not say the printing press or the internet. He said the air conditioner. Singapore sits 1 degree north of the equator. The temperature is between 85 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit every day of the year, with humidity rarely below 75%. Before air conditioning, Singapore was a colonial outpost with limited economic activity beyond its port. After air conditioning, it became one of the wealthiest nations on Earth per capita, a global financial hub, and a center of high-technology manufacturing. Lee Kuan Yew credited air conditioning with allowing Singapore's workforce to be productive in an environment that would otherwise make sustained indoor work physically debilitating. Dubai tells a similar story. A desert settlement with little economic activity beyond pearl diving and fishing became, within a few decades of widespread air conditioning, a global city of glass towers and indoor shopping malls so large they contain ski slopes. These cities do not merely use air conditioning. They are constituted by it. Without AC, they would not exist in their current form. This worked, but it came with a cost that nobody fully appreciated until the 1980s. Remember Thomas Migley and Freon? That miracle refrigerant? Non-toxic, non-flammable, chemically inert? It turns out that chemically inert is precisely the problem. CFCs like Freon are so stable that almost nothing in the lower atmosphere breaks them down. They do not dissolve in rain. They do not react with other gases. They do not decompose in sunlight at ground level. They just float upward year after year until they reach the stratosphere, about 15 to 35 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And there, something different happens. In the stratosphere, ultraviolet radiation from the sun is intense enough to break apart CFC molecules. When a CFC molecule breaks, it releases a chlorine atom. That chlorine atom reacts with ozone, a molecule made of 3 oxygen atoms that forms a thin layer in the stratosphere. This ozone layer absorbs most of the sun's ultraviolet radiation, protecting life on the surface from DNA damage, skin cancer, and crop failure. One chlorine atom from one CFC molecule can destroy up to 100,000 ozone molecules before it is finally neutralized. 100,000. The math is terrifying. Every Freon molecule that leaked from every air conditioner, every refrigerator, every aerosol can for 50 years was a tiny time bomb, drifting slowly upward toward the ozone layer. In 1985, scientists from the British Antarctic Survey published a paper revealing that the ozone layer over Antarctica had thinned by roughly 40% since the late 1970s. The ozone hole. The news hit the public with a force that few environmental discoveries have matched. This was not a theoretical risk. This was a measurable, visible wound in the atmosphere, directly caused by chemicals that were in virtually every building on Earth. The public demanded action. Governments, for once, responded quickly. The Montreal Protocol, signed in 1987, is widely regarded as the most successful international environmental agreement in history. It mandated the phase-out of CFCs and other ozone-depleting substances on a specific timetable. 197 countries signed it. Every country on Earth. It is the only United Nations treaty in history to achieve universal ratification. The protocol worked. CFC production dropped by 99%. The ozone layer, while still damaged, is slowly recovering. Scientists estimate it will return to pre-1980 levels by roughly 2060, assuming compliance continues. But here is the twist. The chemicals that replaced CFCs, called hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, do not destroy ozone. That problem was solved. But HFCs are potent greenhouse gases. Some HFCs have a global warming potential thousands of times greater than carbon dioxide. Pound for pound, the refrigerant in your air conditioner is one of the most powerful greenhouse gases on the planet. And as the world gets hotter due to climate change, more people buy air conditioners, which use more HFCs, which contribute to more warming, which makes more people buy air conditioners. It is a feedback loop of extraordinary elegance and terrible consequence. Consider the numbers. Today, roughly 1.6 billion air conditioning units are in operation worldwide. The International Energy Agency projects that number will reach 5.6 billion by 2050. That is roughly 4 billion new air conditioners in 25 years. To put that in perspective, it means the world will need to install roughly 10 new air conditioners every second, every day, for the next quarter century. Most of that growth will come from India, China, Indonesia, Nigeria, Brazil, and other developing nations in hot climates, where rising incomes are putting air conditioning within reach of hundreds of millions of people for the first time. Today, only about 5% of Indian households have air conditioning. In Indonesia, it is under 10%. In sub-Saharan Africa, it is under 5%. Compare that to the United States, where over 90% of homes have air conditioning, or Japan, where it is over 90%. As these developing economies grow, their citizens will demand the same comfort that Americans and Japanese take for granted, and they will be entirely right to demand it. The coming wave of global air conditioning adoption will be one of the largest energy demand events in human history. By 2050, the energy required for air conditioning globally is projected to triple. Air conditioning is already responsible for roughly 10% of global electricity consumption. In some countries, it is much higher. In Saudi Arabia, air conditioning accounts for over 70% of peak electricity demand. In India, it is the fastest-growing source of electricity demand, period. In the United States, air conditioning drives roughly 1/6 of total electricity consumption, and on the hottest days in the hottest states, it can account for over half of the load on the grid. This is why power grids strain and sometimes fail during heat waves. The air conditioning load overwhelms the system. Every house, every office, every store is running its compressor at full capacity simultaneously. And the grid was not always designed for that level of simultaneous demand. This creates an almost philosophical dilemma. Air conditioning is not a luxury. In many climates, it is a medical necessity. Heat kills more people annually than any other weather-related event. During the European heat wave of 2003, over 70,000 people died, most of them elderly people in buildings without air conditioning. During the Pacific Northwest heat dome of 2021, hundreds died in a region where many homes had no cooling systems because they had never needed them. Denying air conditioning to people in hot climates in the name of emissions reduction is morally indefensible. But providing air conditioning to everyone who needs it using current technology will accelerate the very warming that makes air conditioning necessary. The machine that solves the heat problem contributes to the heat problem. Willis Carrier did not cause climate change, but the technology he created is now both a critical defense against it and a measurable contributor to it. The Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, adopted in 2016, addresses this directly. It mandates the phase-down of HFCs, aiming to reduce their production by 80% by the 2040s. Replacement refrigerants with much lower global warming potential are already being developed and deployed. Propane, yes, the same propane used in grills, is emerging as a leading alternative refrigerant because it has a global warming potential of only 3 compared to over 1,000 for common HFCs. It is flammable, which brings its own engineering challenges, but modern systems use such small quantities that the fire risk is considered manageable. Other alternatives include carbon dioxide itself, used as a refrigerant under high pressure, and hydrofluoroolefins, or HFOs, which break down in the atmosphere within days rather than persisting for decades. Heat pump technology, which is essentially an air conditioner that can run in reverse to provide heating as well as cooling, is becoming increasingly efficient. The latest generation of heat pumps can provide 3 to 5 units of heating or cooling energy for every unit of electrical energy consumed. That 3 to 5 ratio is not a minor improvement. It means that a heat pump, powered by electricity from a solar panel, can move 3 to 5 times as much thermal energy as the electrical energy it consumes. It is cheating the thermodynamic books, in a sense, by moving existing heat rather than creating it from scratch. When powered by renewable electricity, a modern heat pump is one of the lowest carbon ways to control indoor temperature. Willis Carrier's basic insight that you can control indoor climate by manipulating the phase changes of a working fluid remains as valid as it was in 1902. The engineering is the same. The chemistry is changing. The stakes are incomparably higher. There is something I find remarkable about the arc of this story. It begins with a 25-year-old engineer trying to keep ink from smearing on paper. That engineer creates a machine that controls humidity. That machine makes movie theaters comfortable, which creates the summer blockbuster. It makes factories productive in hot climates, which enables industrialization of the tropics. It makes homes livable in the Sun Belt, which triggers the largest internal migration in American history. That migration reshapes Congress, which reshapes national politics. Meanwhile, The chemical that made the machine safe for homes turns out to be destroying the ozone layer. The world responds with the most successful environmental treaty in history. The replacement chemicals turn out to be greenhouse gases, and the machine itself becomes both a defense against and a contributor to the defining environmental challenge of the 21st century. All of this, every single link in this chain, traces back to a humidity problem at a printing press in Brooklyn in 1902. There is a concept in engineering called unintended consequences. Usually, it refers to small, manageable surprises. A door hinge squeaks. A software update breaks an old feature. The air conditioner is unintended consequences at civilizational scale. Willis Carrier wanted to print magazines. What he got was a technology that rearranged populations, redrew political maps, revolutionized architecture, created and destroyed atmospheric chemistry, and now sits at the center of a global energy and climate debate that will define the next century. Next time you adjust your thermostat, consider what you are actually touching. You are touching the end point of a chain that starts with misaligned ink in Brooklyn, runs through a Cornell graduate's dew point calculations, passes through toxic refrigerant disasters, Hollywood's summer blockbusters, a demographic revolution, a hole in the ozone layer, an unprecedented global treaty, and the ongoing negotiation between human comfort and planetary stability. Your air conditioner is not a simple appliance. It is one of the most consequential machines ever built. And it was invented because somebody's cyan was not lining up with their magenta.